Welcome to the Future Generations Podcast, providing you with the world-changing content necessary to inspire you, your family, and our planet to a life of optimal health potential. We'll help you make the choices that powerfully influence the lives you bring into this world. It's time to strengthen our resolve to do better now and for our future generations with your host, Dr. Stanton Hom.
Okay, welcome to another episode of the Future Generations Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Stanton Hom. I have with me Ryan Blaser, and we're just laughing before we hit record because I just, there's 6 critical topics that our audience would be radically interested in, whether it's EMFs, whether it's lighting, whether it's mold, etc. And then I asked you a question about chemtrails, and all of a sudden, we just started laughing because it's one, it's not a conspiracy. 2, it's crazy. But I am excited. You are an electromagnetic engineer for over 2 decades. You are a building biologist, and you're the owner of Test My Home, a great company that I was led to. I remember rumblings on my team, but I didn't know that you were going to end up on my schedule. And then I looked it up last night and I was like, yes, who? But yes, I'm so excited because everybody's talking about toxins. Everybody's talking about how compromised we are. And everybody has a deep-seated question of what the heck do we do about it? And I'm excited to have a conversation about that. Welcome, Ryan. I would love our audience to get to introduce you or get to know you. So I'd love for you to introduce yourself to our audience. It'd be awesome.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me and bringing awareness to this topic. I think it's so important right now for people to understand how important it is to take a look at their environment and see how it's affecting their health. And even though you might not be sick from your home could be decreasing your quality of life. And there are things that you could optimize and level up just by paying attention to some of these simple things in your house. I've always been involved and excited and wanted to learn about how the environment interacts with the body. That's always been fascinating to me. I'm somewhat of a biohacker myself. I want to live as healthy as possible, as long as I can. And one of the big things that I've always looked and leaned into is the environment. How does it affect us? And looking into the different, you talked about mold, air quality, the chemicals that we use, the water that we drink, the lighting that's in our eyes, the artificial lighting, and then the technology. These things have such a big impact on our health, and it's so important that we learn about these things. And so that's kind of why we developed and started this company, is to go into people's homes, help them optimize their lives. I'm basically like a functional medicine doctor for the house, and we go in and we fix all these problems and identify them and show you how to live optimally in your environment.
And it's house, but it's virtually any structure that you're consistently in, and this past spring, you see all the influencers start advertising certain things, the air doctor things go on sale, and I think all those things are super important. However, I think having that almost like that doctor, that provider for your actual building, that place that you actually dwell in, the place that you spend multiple hours in. And for us in particular, I'm a prenatal and pediatric chiropractic specialist. I mean, we care a lot about just the world that our babies are coming into. And so chiropractors have always said from a very early stage that it comes down to, back then, was 3 T's. It was physical traumas, chemical toxins, emotional thought patterns. Now it's technology, but I've learned that from a foundational physiological level, that our nervous system and our sensory aspects of things receive at least 109 known sensory perceptions at any given moment. And if those things are being virtually attacked, if your nervous system and if your immune system and your hormonal system are being attacked by this cascade of crazy things, you should probably know about it.
Right. And you mentioned something. There was a study done several years ago that showed over 92% of our lives are spent indoors, inside of a structure, whether it be work, whether it be your home, whether it be your car. Now, if you think about that area that you're breathing, what's in that air? What's the lighting? And that is so much different than the outdoor environment, where our bodies thrive in nature, the clean air, the clean water, the natural sunlight. But when we're in these environments, that are inside, it's synthetic, it's replicated, and a lot of times we're not getting the benefits from nature.
Like I think Dr. Zach Bush says you go from one box to another box, and it's
Yep.
like you just transmit like yourself through different boxes, and it's one, a deficiency of nature, but two, it's a toxicity of things that we just don't necessarily know. So what would you say, maybe, is that the definition of the building biologist, like basically a functional medicine provider for a building and a structure, or
Yep.
is there more
That
to
and the
it?
goal is to integrate nature as much as we can back into the built environment.
Gotcha. What does that look like, that process of integrating nature back in?
So it's basically going into the home and doing a full range of testing. And of course, we want to test outside, get our background levels. Then we go inside and test the inside. We want to see, is there a difference? What's the CO2 levels outside versus inside? What's the chemical load inside the air? What kind of natural lighting are we getting outside versus the artificial lighting? And so once we get some scientific data, our company is data driven, scientific driven, and we look at these numbers and we see how close are we to actual nature. And in most cases, we're pretty far off, unfortunately.
Gotcha. What would you say, just to give a little bit of a background behind you and your wife who founded the company, why? Where did this come from? Was there any particular inspiration? Was there any particular catalyst that led to you guys investigating all of this?
Yeah, the majority of my career up until about 5 years ago when we started this company, I was working for government agencies, Department of Environmental Quality, Department of Energy, nuclear waste cleanup, toxic waste protection from the environment. What I noticed was that there was not a lot of protections put in place for residential and for general public. When we just assume, we go through life thinking that we are being protected, that someone is looking out for us, that everything, the buildings, the chemicals, all this stuff is safe. But the fact of the matter is it's not. In fact, some of this stuff can be very toxic. Cancer rates are going through the roof. Chronic illnesses are going through the roof. And we need to look at why. And so a lot of these situations that we see with these agencies is they don't have our best interest in mind, unfortunately. And so we started this company as kind of the middle people to say, hey, let's come into these homes and let's make sure that they're healthy for people. And so, we wanted, when my wife was pregnant with our son, who's now 5, we wanted someone to come into our house and kind of do a full sweep. And I was really kind of blown away to find out that there wasn't really anybody doing that in my area, maybe a couple people across the country. And so we thought this would be a great opportunity to start up this company at this time and to start helping people.
It's crazy coming from that side, right? Coming from the side of regulation, coming from that side of just like understanding like the infrastructure of what these government agencies do or don't do, or what we perceive them to do, but then they actually potentially, it's just very clear there's a lot of capture in a lot of respects from industry. But the idea that, maybe I should ask it this way, either from the public perspective or maybe from that, kind of infrastructure perspective, what would you perceive like are some of the biggest problems we face today?
I would say that a lot of the decisions made at the higher level are driven by money and the need for capitalism to grow and to reduce profits. And because of that, let me give you an example. When I worked for Department of Environmental Quality, every single morning, we would get on this big group meeting with all the agencies across the state, with air quality people and environmentalists, people from the Capitol, and we would determine, based on the pollutants of the air, how much pollutants that are the major polluters across the state could put off into the air. So we had factories and we had production plants, and basically they'd say, okay, today we're going to put off 100,000 pollution units into the sky, and that's going to reach our maximum EPA limit. So then we would get on the phone and we would call these specific polluters and say, okay, you can put off 20,000 units today. You can put off 50,000 units today. And it was all based on how much money they were paying. Well, then it was our job to kind of monitor that and make sure that they didn't exceed that. Well, what we found out, and what I found out in a lot of cases, that people were exceeding that. In the middle of the night, they were pumping stuff out. And when it was stormy, they were pumping stuff out. So not only are the pollution levels at the max EPA limit, but in most cases they're being exceeded.
So then what's worse, right? What's worse? Is it the actual polluters, or is it the agency that says, pay me, and when you pay me enough, I will tell you that you can pollute, but then there's no real, anyways, it's crazy because.
Or is it the consumers driving the need for it? Where does the buck stop?
it's a cycle, and then you add in pharma, right? And then you add in the healthcare system. You add in the fact that like people profit off of people being sick, and then you recognize that that becomes a generational thing that most people don't recognize. Then you see the cycle. It's remarkable, and for you to kind of highlight it, that I've done a ton of research on the pharmaceutical industry, on Rockefeller medicine, on that end of things. But now you can just tell the web is far more intricate than I think we could ever know, and then potentially far more nefarious than we could ever know. So I've learned, and I still teach, and it's probably more, but something to the order of like 80,000 chemicals like exist today that are essentially in our environment that we honestly don't know are there. Like I don't know 80,000 chemicals even as a practitioner, but what is that number accurate? Is that number far more minimal than what's actually real? Does the number not necessarily matter because we have forever chemicals, we have chemtrails, we have, all sorts of things that we don't necessarily know. And then we have things that are not material, like electromagnetic frequencies. What would you say that number is, but then what would you say might be the bigger meaning behind that number?
Yeah, there's a really cool info commercial graphic type thing. It's called The Story of Things. Google it, put it on YouTube. It's super interesting. But the story of cosmetics under The Story of Things, and what they talk about there is about 88,000 chemicals that are in supply right now in the world, and about 2,800 of those have actually gone through stringent studies that they've determined that have effects on humans and animals. Now, they've tested those individually, but what they haven't tested them is in combination with each other. So let's say, bleach by itself can be harmful. Ammonia by itself can be harmful. But when you mix bleach and ammonia, you make chlorine dioxide gas, which can be very dangerous, can kill you. And so a lot of times they found that in combination, these chemicals can have multiplying effects. And when we look at the average female puts on 18 different personal care products and chemicals throughout the day on her body. The male puts an average of 7.
Wow.
And a lot of these now haven't been studied. They haven't been studied in combination with each other. And this stuff is absorbing into the skin and we're breathing it in. And that's where we're seeing these problems.
These are, I just looked that up and it's crazy. I've never even heard of that before. And I'm super excited to learn more about it because I didn't know those statistics, and so you said 88,000, but only 28,000 are actually studied.
2,800 actually.
2,800. So 99% of them are not accounted for.
Right.
And, probably under the same, guys, like these things, there could be things that are generally regarded as safe in by itself, but when coupled with 2,000 other generally regarded as safe things, there's a chronicity of physiological effects, pathological effects that largely we have to contend with. That's crazy.
Yeah. And you look at 200 years ago, 300 years ago, we didn't have any of these chemicals in the air, and we just had natural stuff, nature. And now we have these things all over the place. They're off-gassing from our furniture. They're in our cleaning supplies. If you're still using fragrances, don't throw those away. Those are chemicals. And then all the products we're putting on our body. And it's a wonder why we have these issues.
So you're mentioning before we started recording, can you go over those 6 kind of categories of environmental factors that a building biologist would be an expert in?
Yes, and I'll put them in order.
Sure.
What I see the most issues with is mold is probably the number one. That's really the true pandemic of our time. There's millions of people suffering from mold toxicity and mold poisoning. The next one's going to be EMF exposure. There's too much electronics. We're using too much technology. We're in front of the screen. Another disturbing study came out that we are now past the point where we're spending more time looking into the screen, into the virtual world, than we are looking at reality. Think about that for a minute. So we're looking at either our phones or our computers or our TV more than we are looking out at reality.
Wow.
That's a scary thought to think about. So we've passed that point as society. The next thing would be chemical exposure and we talked about that a little bit, the chemicals we're putting on our body and that we're breathing in. The next category is going to be air. That's going to be allergens, dust, fresh air, chemicals in the air, things that we're going to breathe in that are in our body. And so the next thing is going to be water, the water we're drinking, the water we're bathing in, the water we're showering in. We had the thing that happened with the Ohio train derailment. That's nothing new. That stuff's been going on for the last 100 years. That's just the latest of the tragedies. And then we have lighting, which affects our circadian rhythm and can have a downstream effect from the blue light at night, disrupting our sleep patterns, the full spectrum during the day, making sure we're awake. So those are really the 6 main topics that we focus on.
And lighting, you would say, is the least impactful?
When compared to all of them, I'd say probably, that's probably the least. It's still important, but it's probably the least. Yeah.
Interesting. I've been thinking about that a lot ever since I learned just timeline of things, right? You learn when the invention of the light bulb was, and then you recognize like the immediate manipulation of day and night, where you could just pull all-nighters and then all of a sudden, hospitals and fluorescent and, you just start to recognize that there's all sorts of different factors. But let's start with mold, man, if you don't mind. I would love to pick your brain a little bit about that, because I think I see it everywhere. I see it in all sorts of different providers, like providing protocols for mold, advice around mold. And I would love for you to maybe talk about it from maybe through the lens of what you're an expert in, but maybe what we could be aware of, out there as far as like, cause you start to see these industries pop up and these professions pop up, and they don't always tell you the truth about how to take care of that too, because they're, a lot of times they're just opportunists, and so would love to hear, man.
Sure. One of the first things you can do when you get done listening to this podcast is go to your toilet tank in your house, lift up the toilet tank and look and see if you have mold growing in there. If you do, that could be an indication of a larger problem within your house. The reason why, when you flush the toilet tank, it pulls air in when the water goes down. If you have mold spores floating around your air, it's going to land inside your toilet tank where it's dark and damp. Now, mold needs to have water and it needs to have food in order to grow. Now, food can be any organic material. It can be wood, it can be dead skin cells, it can be paper, drywall, building material, dust, so on. So if we have mold in the toilet tanks, let's keep looking a little bit further throughout the house. Let's start looking underneath all of the sinks. Now, was there any past dripping? Do we see any water damage? Do we see any bubbling in the paint on the walls? Do we see baseboards that look like they're bowed out? If we've lived in the home, maybe we can think about water damage in the past. Do we got a 5-year-old boy that likes to splash in the bathtub and make a mess every time he takes a bath? Has the toilet overflowed? Do we have a leaky roof somewhere? Was there a water heater that broke? So if there's the answer was yes to those, then we have a high probability that we could have a mold situation in the walls if it wasn't addressed properly. So if you have all of those things, you're not feeling well in your house, you say, man, I just went to vacation in Hawaii on the beach. I felt amazing. As soon as I come back home, my symptoms come back. That's a huge red flag that you have something going on in your house. And mold is usually the first place that a lot of people want to look and see if you have an issue.
And I can't tell you how many times I've heard that, right? Like, I had a buddy, he's a chiropractor, and he didn't have that. Like, but then when he would travel, he'd still be sick. And then he opened up his pillowcase, his travel pillowcase, and it was full of mold. And it actually had an allergy cover, so he couldn't actually see it because it was actually being trapped inside, But then when he did that with his home, he just bought a new home and they had to level the entire thing. And when they leveled the entire thing, he would drive up to see the work, and he would still have like exposure. It was crazy because they rebuilt the home and he still had symptoms, even though and it's because it's in the atmosphere. It eventually essentially comes into the ecosystem that is in the surrounding area as well. And so it's important to understand that. Can you answer the question why in that particular family, his was so severe and his wife had like no symptoms?
So it all depends on our toxic load or our toxic bucket of our body. Yeah. We can take so much, and then at one point we start to overflow with toxins in the body, and that's when we start to see symptoms. And it could be whatever the weakest link is, depending on our genetics. Also, some people can detox a lot faster than others. It's that simple. I exercise, I do sauna, you know, I'm in homes a lot that are moldy. So I have to stay on top and do regular detox. But for the average person, if they're not doing that, the toxins can build up in their homes because our bodies are meant to detox and get rid of chemicals and toxins in the body. But the problem is these days is that we're overloading the body and we're filling up the bucket and it's starting to overflow. So in that case, maybe the wife was able to detox faster. Maybe the husband had previous things from a previous home, or, you know, I start to talk to families like this and like, oh, I remember my grandma's basement. We used to go down there and play hide and go seek, and there was black stuff on the walls, and your toxic load started to build up from when you were a child. And even now there's studies showing even in your mother's womb, you're collecting some mercury and heavy metals from the mother all the way back then. And so it's just a matter of this game of being able to detox faster than the toxins in.
And it's not a one-to-one relationship, right? It doesn't have to be a toxic load only from that mold in your grandma's basement that makes you sensitive to mold today. It's the whole picture of those 6 essential like categories, or more so, right? Like the 88,000 chemicals in the world.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because sometimes when people call us, well, a lot of times they're looking for that one single silver bullet. Like, what is the one thing that's making me sick? And what we usually find, it's a combination of a lot of different things. You have lack of fresh air, you have a little bit of mold underneath this sink, you're using some toxic chemicals, and you're sleeping next to your router, you know. And that's why we address all of those things when it comes to the environment. People that come in that just do mold or just test your water or just do EMF, you're missing a big piece of the pie. You got to look at all of those.
Gotcha. So when I had a patient come in not too long ago, and she's already done like a radical mold protocol. She's had some amazing results. And recently they found like mold in her bedroom, right? Which is interesting because she's, you know, in the home she grew up in. But one thing that there was a discrepancy between what the mold that she was tested for and then the mold that they tested the building for. Like, and so could you talk a little bit about like those, like maybe some, like what are the best tests, and what are there specific strains that people would be more sensitive to? Are there things that, you know, just because I imagine being in the industry, you've seen a lot of funny stuff out there. There's a lot of people like, hey, you're clear, mold is good. And then you don't look on the back end of what they actually look for and all the different ways that you could potentially be maybe misled.
Right. And what you're talking about is a mycotoxin urine analysis that you can take that's going to tell you what mycotoxins you have. And mycotoxins are the chemical byproduct from mold that mold puts off as its defense mechanism. That's the most dangerous part to the mold, because it's not actually the mold underneath the sink that makes you sick, unless you're going over there rolling in the mold, licking it. What it is, it's the mycotoxins that are coming off of the mold, floating through the air. They land on your pillow. You go lay down at night, you breathe that in, and you have a neurological effect that gets in the body. Now you do a urine analysis and you can detect these metabolites. Now the problem with the urine analysis is that most people don't do that test correctly. You need to do a selective fast at least a week. Well, some people say 4. I say a week before you do that urine analysis. You need to do a really strict elimination diet, and you need to eliminate all grains, corn, wheat, rice. You need to eliminate any kind of fruits that you can't peel. You need to eliminate chocolates, and you need to eliminate coffee and some nuts, because the problem is those. Oh, and also I call it factory raised meat. These cows and chickens that are in these little pens, and they're just eating corn, GMO corn and wheat, and it's a high probability that we have mold on those. They're uptaking that and it gets stored in their fat. And so what happens a lot of time with this urine analysis is you're really picking up mycotoxins that are in the food that you're eating. And surprisingly, we see that more often than actually coming from your house. You got to have a pretty good mold source in your house, be giving you some of the high mycotoxins that you're reading in the blood. And so when people actually go back and retake these tests, doing an elimination diet, a lot of those mycotoxins dissipated.
And that has nothing to do with whether or not you just eat an organic diet. Right, mycotoxins are not actually tested for, right? Like, and they could be generally just part of the natural ecosystem of your food.
I was at our local organic grocery store, like a Whole Foods, a local place, and the lady was stocking the fruit, and I looked inside of the box, and right in the middle was about the moldiest apple you'd ever seen. It was like, it was inundated with mold, and she's picking all the apples around it and putting it out on the thing. And I was just blown away that they were actually putting those apples out there, at least without wiping them off. Now, I didn't want to say anything. I was with my kids, but whoever bought those apples and took them home absolutely got mold in their system from eating those, because they were in this box for who knows how long, the last week, as they were being transported. Mold is just being inundated in there, and all those apples are covered with mycotoxins.
Do you have a resource of where this elimination diet is?
No, you can just look up molds that are going to be more susceptible to food that are more susceptible to mold.
People have to worry about their coffee too, like that's the whole like bulletproof thing. And I know there's a couple coffees out there that are free of mycotoxins, and most people don't even know that that's the primary source. That's a good way. I'm glad that you shared that, because it's interesting, like, because you could be so perfect in so many ways. You could do all these crazy remediations in your home when in reality you're just leaving the main source like right in plain sight.
Well, and even worse, people will get these tests done, the urinalysis, and they'll see high mycotoxin. They'll freak out and they'll think it's in their house. They'll hire me or another company to spend thousands of dollars going through their home with a fine-tooth comb looking for this mold, and the whole time it was never in the mold. It was in the bread they just had for breakfast.
Wow, man. Wow. That's frightening to some respects, right? Because I remember going into this, actually before I even became a chiropractor. I started to learn about detox pathways. I started to learn about the environment, and so I've been studying that longer than I've been studying chiropractic and what I actually provide on a day-to-day basis. And it's crazy what becomes like second nature, like it's just how we live. And people talk about that, and we talk about 80-20. And I don't love that phrase, because most people's 80s aren't clean enough, and most people's 20s are absolutely disgusting, And so it's actually got to be like a 99-1, and your 99 has to be exceptional, and your 1 has to be pretty damn good. It has to be, it's kind of an interesting dynamic, because like you said, like something, I'm so glad that you said conventional meats. I'm so glad you said that, because we have been a promoter of pasture-raised meats for so many years. And it's crazy to think that people still don't recognize that the highest, consumption of all antibiotics is actually through like livestock. It's not even through human consumption. And we don't even consider, like, if it's a filthy environment that they're preventatively, prophylactically throwing the majority of the antibiotics delivered in the world to these animals, that it's actually not the antibiotic, and it's just cleaning up the environment, but there's no cleaning up that industry at all.
Yeah, so important to eat healthy. My 4 main pillars that me and my family go by and I talk to my clients about is clean water, clean air, clean food, and clean thoughts. Those are the 4 basics that you have got to do. It doesn't matter what else you're doing in your life. You've got to do those 4 things. That's just the basics. And the scary thing is a lot of people aren't at that point.
Yeah. Tell me, I'm going to skip, man. Clean water. What does that mean to you?
That means that the majority of the tap water coming out of people's faucets these days are not safe to drink.
My patients have probably already like scoured the world with all like the inside of tap. What would you say are the best ways to clean water?
You really got to get a whole home filtration system with some KDM charcoal and some filter, media in there and some micro filters. And then I would run it secondary through an RO system at your drinking source.
Gotcha.
The whole home's going to get about 95% of the water. That's what you're showering, you're bathing in, you're absorbing stuff through your skin, but the stuff you're actually drinking and cooking with needs the extra level with an RO system. That's awesome. Just bare minimum these days. You got to have that.
I'm going to pat myself on the back right now, because that's what we have. What have you heard anything about these structured water systems? Do you know much about that? I don't know enough,
That's like I mentioned earlier, I'm a scientist. Our company is strictly science driven, data driven. And so anything kind of on fringe, things like that, we don't promote, we don't talk about. Now, that being said, I am a very open-minded person, and I believe in a lot of
Yep.
knowledge out there that I don't understand. And there's a lot of things going on that I don't know about. You don't know what you
Yep.
don't know. But when it comes to water filtration and chemicals in the water, I can take a sample of your water. I can send it to the laboratory and say, you have XYZ chemicals in your water. We're going to install this filter. We're going to run the water through it. Now I'm going to take a sample. These chemicals are now gone. This water is now clean. When it comes to structured water, adding this and that, and doing all the extra stuff, all I say with that is if it feels better and makes sense to you and you feel good about it in your heart, go for it. But when it comes down to the way, let's get it back to baseline and let's have just clean water. If we can get clean water, let's move on to the next thing.
That's exactly how I feel about it. And it's because, like, today it's like alkaline. Tomorrow it's going to be maybe more acidic, it's going to be, and then you start to like homogenize, a certain variable. And then all of a sudden, like, it's not going to have the same effect because the research may change, but there is no debate about fluoride and a neurotoxin. There's no debate about like heavy metals in your water. There's no debate about all the things that we've known for many, many years, but no one really actually does that right now. And if you haven't seen a cross section of a tap water pipe, you should Google that right now too, right? So I appreciate that answer, because we're going to get, a couple of the structured things because we want to test, because we're really interested, because we have very unique things, but we wanted to get those basics done first. And that's where we start too.
Absolutely. And how about drinking some of your neighbor's Prozac that goes down the drain? No, thank you.
So I met a medical doctor at a political, like several years ago, before I was involved in anything that was, like more about activism for like the population. It was more about like networking for chiropractic and things like that. And I remember meeting a medical, he's like, oh, I like chiropractors. I was like, great, whatever, man. You actually probably don't even know what we do. But in the next conversation was like, I think we should put statins in the water. I was like, you're nuts, man. Are you kidding? I couldn't take it. I continued the conversation. I was just like, there's no way that you're going to convince me that. And then at the same time, like, side effect. I went down the road and he was like, well, everybody's got cholesterol issues. I'm like, wow. It's like idiocracy movie. Anyways, hey, let's skip to EMFs, man, because EMFs are everywhere. It is a highly unregulated industry. One of my favorite resources online is an Instagram account called We Are Not Sam. And, the SAM unit that they tested, like all of these, basically bogus tests on the dangers of radiation, electromagnetic frequencies and things like that. Do we all need to be like in our own little Faraday bubbles? Do we need to essentially wire all the communication in our homes? Or are there other strategies, and are there things that we definitely just need to know that could help mitigate some of the risks, but also just like give us some peace of mind? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a tough one because there's so much noise on EMF and there's so much misinformation out there. And it's really hard for people to know what the truth is. They're trying to do their own education and research on this stuff. But, EMF is a class 2B carcinogen. It is a known cancer causing agent. It is causing health effects. And so with that in mind, let's just try to minimize and let's practice practical avoidance, which means if we don't need to be exposed to this stuff, let's turn it off. If there's an alternative that we can do, let's go ahead and use that alternative. So if, for example, instead of having ear pods in your ear that are blasting your brain within inches of your cortex, let's go ahead and use wired ones. Simple switch out. If we're in our office 8 hours a day, let's hardwire our laptop and put it on airplane mode so that we're not frying our brain. If we need to talk on the phone, let's hold it out on speakerphone a couple feet from our head instead of up against the brain. At night, let's turn off our Wi-Fi router. Let's turn off the devices. If you want to go one step further, you can even turn off your circuits at night. So it's not really a debate anymore about whether this stuff is harmful or not. We've solved that many years ago with tons of scientific studies. The debate at this point is how much exposure and for how long, and what are you going to tolerate for you and your family, And some people don't give a crap at all. I mean, there's still people smoking cigarettes and eating fast food all day long. So obviously this type of information is not for them. They don't really care. But for the people that do care about their health, that want to optimize their health, reducing your EMF exposure is one of the biggest hacks that you can do. If you're not redoing that, you're missing out on a big hack.
So it's basically like a dial, right? It's a dial of how much you're exposed to and how much you're not. Is there any validity to those protective devices? Is there any validity to, I've seen like the Somavedic panels or whatever they are, like things that you can put in your home that kind of change the frequency of the environment of the home? Or is that all essentially, like you're saying, outside of what you're saying is scientific, or versus what is actually known today?
So if you think about what those devices are claiming, what are they claiming to do?
Great question. I don't know all of them. I think some of them are claiming to block, and I think some of them are claiming to neutralize.
Right. And so if you have a question whether those devices are work, there's a couple easy ways that you can test these out. So when it comes to EMF, we have 3 different types of EMF. E is going to be the electrical energy. That's electric fields. That's electrons that are traveling on the wire. They travel out into the air. They can affect us. Now, the M of the EMF is magnetic energy. So think motors or movement or fans, anything that has a lot of energy being used. Yep. They create a magnetic field around it. Okay, and that can radiate out through our bodies, can be very harmful. Now, the F is the fields or the frequencies. Think about radio frequencies. That's what's traveling through the airwaves. That's all of our cool technology, our cell phone, our Bluetooth. So if we look at these 3 different categories, and let's take a device. I won't say any names. We'll just X device. Hold it up to the light. See, does the light flicker? Does the light stop? Does the electron stop traveling? Okay, if it doesn't, then it's not doing anything with electrical energy. Okay, let's talk about magnetic energy. Let's turn your blender on. Now take one of these devices and put it by the blender. Does the blender quit working? Does the motor quit spinning? If it doesn't, then it's not affecting magnetic fields in any way. Let's talk about radio frequency. If you hold it by the cell phone or your Wi-Fi, does the Wi-Fi quit working? Does your cell phone quit working? If you put one of these devices near the microwave, does the microwave no longer cook the food anymore? If the answer is no, it doesn't make any effect, then it's not doing anything for us. It's not blocking, it's not harmonizing, it's not creating a magical force field around your house, around your body. So you can go ahead and try these experiments for yourself with any one of these devices and see for yourself.
Gotcha. It's kind of that's an interesting thought.
And I can tell you from experience that I've yet to find a single one that affects EMF in any way.
Really? That's interesting.
And if you find one, let me know. But I can tell you that I haven't.
Well, and then it goes into the same category. It's like if it's working to some degree anecdotally in your family, then keep going at it. But we also we got to work at it both ways, right? Like if we get fired up because this industry capture 20,000 or 88,000 chemicals in the environment, the polluters get to turn on their, you get 20,000 today because you donated the most. Like if we're asking them to have long-term surveillance studies on the bad effects of how this, is going to affect human health, then we should also recognize that we should have that same kind of rigor of standard of how we're protecting it, right? Like we can't just say, that's bad, here's the solution, but this solution doesn't really have anything necessarily backing it either. Doesn't mean you shouldn't try it, doesn't mean you shouldn't kind of vet it, doesn't mean that it isn't valid. It just means that from your end, it's not something that you're going to say, hey, I endorse this, because it hasn't necessarily been shown to do that yet.
Right. And really, there is a big thing to psychological impact and placebo effect, that I truly believe that if you honestly believe in your heart and your mind that it's doing something for you and helping you, it probably is. The problem is people are getting a lot of false sense of security from this stuff. And then they feel like, it's like if I tell you, here's this sticker, put it on a pack of cigarettes, and now you can smoke those cigarettes and it's not going to hurt you. It's going to neutralize the harmful effects of that cigarette. Are you going to believe me? You're going to think I'm a freaking nutcase. Now, fortunately though, there are people that think that's true, and then they're going to continue to smoke the cigarettes, and they're going to continue to have the harmful effect. So when I see these types of devices that are claiming this stuff, it's really hard for me not to speak up, because these people are still getting the negative effects. They're still getting harmed. They're still getting injured from this stuff, when simply they could just talk about reduction. They could talk about distance. They could talk about not using these devices as much and getting some helpful boundaries set up.
What air filter do you have?
I like Jasper air filter.
Okay.
It's a really nice one.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Tell me about like Air Doctors and Molecules and those guys that are all like super popular.
So, these air filters are basically just a media filter. It's some paper, and it's hooked to a fan, and it's pulling air through this media filter, and it's catching particles in it. There's not rocket science behind this. Now, they're just packaged different. There's different airflows. Some are noisier, some look better. My favorite is the Jasper Air. You get the most bang for your buck. It's a lifetime warranty. It looks beautiful. It's quiet. Some of the lower ones you mentioned are kind of more of the Honda Accords of the realm. Any of these are really going to work, but you know what the best is get a high quality filter in your HVAC system, and just turn your fan mode to on, so that it's always running, and that it's always filtering, and it's always using the built-in filter in your home. So you upgrade to a $30 filter instead of a $10 one, flip that switch to on, and you're going to do more than any of those filters.
Really?
Yep.
Oh, that's insane. So $30 instead of $2,000 or whatever it is to do your whole home.
And to gauge, simple gauge, you don't need any expensive equipment. Just look at your surfaces. And if you're accumulating dust really fast, then it means that you need more air filtration. If you don't see a lot of dust in your surfaces, it means your air quality is pretty good. So in a perfect clean room environment, you would never see dust on a surface, because there's not dust in the air.
Gotcha. So I think we're talking around it, and it's clear like the level of expertise that you have, especially the decades of experience that you have in this field. If you could verbalize your purpose and mission, or maybe even the purpose and mission of Test My Home, like what would you say that is today?
I think that there's millions and millions of people that are suffering for no reason, and they don't know what the cause is. And they're spending a lot of time and a lot of money trying to figure out why the heck they feel like crap. And our world needs more people that are thinking clearly, that are feeling better, to get this place on the right track. And so if I can do my little part to help save a few lives here and there and help optimize people's lives, it makes me sleep better at night.
Tell me what you mean by clear thoughts.
So, for example, one of my biggest symptoms from EMF exposure is brain fog. When I'm around EMF a lot, it's hard for me to complete sentences. I'll make a phone. I'm like, who did I just call? I'll try to read a book, and I get to the bottom of the page, and I don't know what I just read. Like, it's bad. But if I am in my home where it's a clean environment, we have no Wi-Fi here, it's all EMF free, my mind works so much better. I come up with new ideas. I'm more creative, more positive. And so I feel like there's a lot of people in this world that are suffering similar things. They get off from work at night, their brains burn out. They just sit in front of the TV and crack a beer, and that's their life, when they could be out being very productive.
What would you say? How many kids do you have?
3.
3 kids. How old are they?
They are 5, 9, and 13.
I was laughing when you said like 5-year-old. My kid's almost 4, and she's a maniac, man. Like, she gets into things, and she's like water, like the bathtub. Like, thank you for that visual, because I got to go check out our baseboards and everything, because it's like we're probably dealing with something like that. But do you guys as a family also maybe have like values or thoughts or affirmations or things like that you create for your own, how you guys kind of bolster your kids' minds, in terms of how they navigate the world?
We do. And it's tough. My 13-year-old does not have a cell phone, and I think she's probably the only one out of her friends that doesn't. Yeah. We have strict no technology rules in the bedrooms. We have movie night one night a week where we sit down and watch movies together as a family, but the rest of the time we're playing outside. We're doing board games. We're reading out of real books. We're jumping on the trampoline. We're doing things like we used to do when we were kids. We don't rely on technology, and I think that we stand out a little bit like that with our friends. But I don't want my kids to grow up in the virtual world glued into technology. I want them to experience reality as much as possible.
That's awesome, man. What would you say if you could future pace the world when you see like the manifestation of your vision and the vision of Test My Home, what do you see for the world? Like, what's that future world look like?
I think it's just waking people up. I think a lot of people are asleep right now. They're asleep at the wheel, and there's just a lot of things going on and happening that can be a little frightening at times. And it's up to us to be aware of what's going on around us, what's going on in our environment, and we need to pay attention to that. Our food, our air, our water, everything. The media that we see, a lot of crazy stuff going on, and we just need to open our minds and be mindful of that.
That's awesome, man. What would you say, of all the things that we talked about today, what would be the highest priority that would move the needle for a family, that would move the needle for our listeners the most, the one action they could take?
I mean, one act, and we didn't really talk about this, but this is probably the most common thing that I see, is that people's homes do not have enough ventilation. They do not have a fresh air intake system. So in a commercial building, a public space, you're required to have like 30 CFM per person per hour of fresh air exchange. You're not required to have that in a residential home. And unfortunately, we don't see a lot of homes being built with fresh air intake systems. So no matter what's going on in the home, whether you're using chemicals or you have mold or you have bacteria or mycotoxins or endotoxins, it's all building up in the home and it's not being flushed out with fresh air. So simply going over to the windows and cracking the windows, open the doors, flushing out your house at least once a day for 15 minutes is going to make a huge impact.
Wow, man. I love it. I love it. It's crazy that I take a ton of notes. And I usually take a ton of notes that are like, oh, that's an amazing thing. I'm going to share that in terms of like a thought or a belief or something like that. But you in the fastest amount of time, I think shared the most practical stuff that I think is just going to make a massive difference in our community. I'm so grateful for that, because I think at the end of the day, it's very confusing. I think people know that there's so much toxicity out there, but they don't know how to classify it. They don't know how to then take action on it. And then they don't recognize that something so simple that the fan on your system, your HVAC system, flip it on, just let it run, get a better filter. And that could be already, something that will clean the air in your home in a drastic way, but then 15 minutes of ventilation, add in all the water, add in the EMFs, add in all those things. I'm grateful, man. I really am. Cause at the end, I knew that this was going to be a great interview. I can't remember, like I was sharing with you, how I was directed to you, but it was one of those things that I immediately said to my team, like, let's get them. Like, let's see when we can get them on the calendar, because I think it's going to kind of clear, pun intended, clear the air for a lot of people and recognize that they can take a lot of action today on very simple things that will not only help them in this moment, but continually to compound, because toxic load is cumulative, but so is that detox process too. That's awesome.
Right. Yep. You got it.
That's awesome, man. Is there anything you want to share? Any last words?
A couple other just easy tips you can do.
Yeah.
Take off your shoes in your house. That's another big one I see, that people they walk through the public bathroom, they go fill their car up with gas and they step in the oils and they spit on the ground, and they go to the park and the dog poop, and then they walk in their house and they kick their feet up on the couch. And especially if you have little ones crawling on the floor, that is so nasty. Do not do that, please.
Oh, man, that's awesome.
That messes up your home so fast. And keep your home clean. A clean home is also a healthy home. Get rid of the plastics in your house, in your kitchen especially. Always go back to those four: the clean water, clean air, clean food, clean thoughts. If you can stick with those basics, that really goes a long ways.
That's awesome, man. I'm a veteran. That reminded me, this may be too much information for my listeners, but it's funny anyways, and I'm not going to not say it because it's in my brain and I can't let go of it. I was in an outhouse in Iraq when I was deployed. And like, people write a bunch of shit on the walls. And there's this one that says, "The fly on your face was the fly on my shit." And I at that moment was like, oh, that's so gross. But then you're sharing the same thing, right? Like we're an Asian household. We always take our shoes off. People we take our shoes off in our office too, which is awesome because we're chiropractors. We do a lot of steps around. We have a ton of babies. We have a ton of kids. And it was something that I just learned growing up. It was culturally something we had as a part of our lifestyle, but it actually has an embedded effect because you have no idea. Well, you actually do. If you track your steps and you know where you go, you know for a fact that all those places that you listed are places that are going to be on your baby's hands, that they're going to lick the floor and they're not going to not do it. And we think that that's okay. And there is a hormetic effect to certain toxins, but you don't want that. That's awesome that you shared that. I appreciate that.
Yeah. We'll take a small hormetic effect, but not all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, man. Awesome, Ryan. I am so grateful, man. If there's ever anything that we can do with our community to help you guys out, you guys service California.
We do. Yeah. Yeah. We make the regular rounds between LA, Phoenix, Austin, Salt Lake, Boise. We just did a trip out to Florida. But we'll travel anywhere in the country if you want to pay the travel fees. We'll head on out there and do the full analysis on your house. And it's pretty incredible. Some of the stories we have, going into people's homes that are super sick, that have been to multiple doctors. They can't figure out what's going on. And it's so rewarding to find the problem, watch them get better, follow them through their health journey. It's pretty amazing. If you haven't had your home inspected at least once, have a professional like me or find somebody like me to come in your home and go through and just checkbox everything off, because I'd hate for you or a family member to wake up one day with cancer from something that was 100% avoidable.
Are there any local companies in California? Actually, you service California, so it would be you guys. That's awesome.
We do, yes.
Is the best way your website? How do people stay in contact with you?
So our Instagram, super informative. We put a lot of stuff out on there. It's at Test My Home. Our website is testmyhome.com. You can fill out a form submission. You can book a call with me. We can do a Zoom call. There's a lot of ways to interact with us. We have a lot of free content. I've been on a lot of podcasts like yours that people can listen to, get good information.
Awesome, man. I'm super grateful. And I think this is going to make a huge change, because I think at the end of the day, we know the level of toxicity is at an all-time high. And we also know that our strategies could always be refined and be improved. And you shared a lot of basic stuff that I know we don't do, because sometimes we go for, step 20 when in fact, like 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3, the foundations could actually just be done more on a regular basis. That's awesome, man. Thank you.
Yeah. You bet, man. Thanks for having me. This has been great. I appreciate you spreading awareness in this category. We got a lot of work to do.
We appreciate you joining us for this episode of the Future Generations podcast. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes and Spotify. For more resources based on today's episode, as well as more ways to inspire a brighter future for you and your family, visit us at thefuturegen.com. That's all available exclusively on thefuturegen.com.